This is a Heart and Hand production.
Hello and welcome back to the Scout Report. I'm your host, Adam Thornton, and today we have a bit of a different scouting topic. I guess we're not going to be looking at a player for Rangers. We're going to be discussing a scouting website and magazine. I'm delighted to have Joe Donoghue on with me. Joe, welcome to Heart and Hand. First of all, it's great to have you on.
Thank you very much, Adam. Appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to speak. Looking forward to chatting some players.
Yeah, absolutely. So Joe is a journalist down in Leeds for the Yorkshire Evening Post, but you're also involved in the Scouted Football magazine, website, podcast. Anything else that I've missed there, I think, is a full singing and dancing company. But you're involved in that, and that's, I guess, what you're primarily here to talk about. Do you want to give us just a quick sort of rundown on your history, first of all, in journalism and sport, and how you came to be involved in Scouted?
Yeah, sure. To begin with, I was very. I've always loved football. I've always sort of liked the discovering little known players element to it as well. Probably dating back to sort of all those old Football Manager saves that I had back in the day. Yeah. Scouting those 1-star, 5-star potential players. And it must have been. I was still living at home, and I was looking for sort of scouting courses. To do qualifications and that sort of thing, because it was just something that always intrigued me, and I came across this website. Didn't have loads of traction at the time, but it was very much up my street. I'd always done like lots of sort of amateur writing and player profiles just for fun, really, and got in touch with Scouted Football. That was the website. Saw that they'd produced a digital ebook on sort of 100 players that they think were sort of the best under 23s in world football, and just asked to maybe contribute a few articles, contribute a few pieces, talk about some players that I thought were interesting, who were under 23 or playing in undervalued or underappreciated leagues, and got involved with the guys there. And since then it's just gone strength to strength as a result of the sort of the dedication of the team. We've gone from doing the digital free ebooks to producing in between 2019 and 2021. We produced 12 magazines which featured 25 player profiles each, and then some original writing, original features, and original interviews with relevant people across the world of football. We earlier this year sort of relaunched the website and the subscription service and all that sort of thing. So we've got something called the Scouted Notebook now, which is our Substack, which I'm sure lots of people will be familiar with. But if they're not, it's essentially just another platform to read newsletters and articles on that are on specific topics that you're interested in. So if you're interested in scouting under 23 players, who the next Erling Haaland's going to be, then I'd implore you to check out the Notebook. And just on the back of that, we're looking to hopefully bring the magazines back. So we've set up a Kickstarter, which is on all of our social media accounts, to hopefully, if people are generous enough and people want the mags to come back, then they can contribute to that, and hopefully we can produce something really special. But yeah, Scouted's been a big part of my life journalistically. It's directly helped me get into sort of your more traditional fields of print and digital media, which is what I do sort of the day job, covering Leeds. And yeah, that's pretty much a potted history, if you will, of Scouted and myself.
So I've been a big fan of Scouted for a while. I think I wrote an article a few years back for it on Chiesa, I think it was at that time. And I've obviously kept in touch with it. I've got some of the notebooks, etc. There, it's been a big thing. Certainly, I think when there's so much clickbait about Joe, whether it's articles or whether people just going for sort of sensational, come and look at this player, I think having somewhere that is a bit more long form. To me, I've described it to friends as the blizzard for scouting, if you like. It's a bit more long form. They take a little bit more time to think about things. And if there is a player out there in the sort of under 23 world that is going to become the next Erling Haaland or even anywhere near that, I think you guys have got them covered. So I think it's really extensive. I guess, was that an aim from the start then to not go chasing the high value, if you like, and chasing, we're going to do profiles on Erling Haaland and Mbappe, but we're going to try and cover everyone just so that we're doing this in a kind of nice and organic way? Was that the aim from the start?
Yeah, pretty much. That was the idea, to sort of keep it, to keep it set to a set of principles. Not wanting to sort of sell out. I mean, probably at the financial detriment of all of us, because we all do different jobs and that sort of thing. So it's always been a side project that we've run in conjunction with the rest of our lives. But yeah, I mean, we're really proud of the theme that we've constantly had running. When there might be a lot of hype around a player, we quite like the idea that we might have profiled them a couple of years earlier, when they were at a lesser known club, and sort of just being used as a reference, for lots of industry professionals as well, which is probably one of the more unexpected sides of being part of Scouted, is that you'll go to, I mean, I go to a lot of under 21 games, and a couple of times you get chatting to people and they see, I don't know, the Scouted sticker on your laptop or something, and they go, "Oh, do you like Scouted?" And then you kind of explain, and they go, "No, I've listened to the podcast, or I've got one of the books, or we follow the account," and it's really gratifying to hear. But the intention was always to sort of keep that long form, analytical stuff with maybe a little bit of color thrown in here and there where appropriate, just to provide an oversight on who the next best things are.
Yeah, absolutely. So like Joe said, there's a Scouted notebook there, which is on Substack. You can subscribe to that and get the first look at the articles, etc. there. But they've also got the handbook, which we will share a link to the Kickstarter there. If anyone had the handbook before, I know certainly there's a few subscribers I've spoken to who had Scouted in the past. If you're looking to resubscribe, then we'll put the link in the comments of this Patreon thread. Joe, you also do the podcast. Now, I've listened to that on and off for quite a long time as well. Most of the ones that I tend to listen to have been when Lee Scott's been on. He's been on the show as well. And you pick out what looks like very random players in far-flung areas. Is that your ideal then? I know that you also go in and look at maybe specific clubs and what they're doing academy-wise and various other things. Is that, how do you decide what the next topic is, I guess, on the podcast, and what ones do you find the most satisfying to do?
Well, some of the most satisfying ones to do are with Lee, because his knowledge is encyclopedic. It's he really does have a good handle on things when it comes to scouting players. And I mean, we like to be ahead of the curve, but Lee is always ahead of us, is what I always like to say. But it's, sometimes it's governed by, other youth international tournaments on. So some of the recent ones we've done have been sort of a preview for the under 20 World Cup, which just finished, and then a review and a team of the tournament episode. And then the most recent one we published yesterday was a preview for the under 21 Euros. And, over the course of the last few years, we've done those for the under 19 Euros, under 17s, all those sorts of things. But as you say, sometimes it's, scouting in Scandinavia, just picking out players who've been interesting for various reasons, or, scouting a specific club who, I don't know, have a historic academy or a fairly prolific academy when it comes to giving minutes to young players, or even, young coaches who have gone on to do really well, or have maybe flown under the radar a little bit. So yeah, there's good variety. I like to think that there's something for everyone on there. If one episode that you're not really that interested in, then maybe the following week or following month there's something which is I don't know, that piques your interest. So I think it's just, I try to provide an overview of the lesser known stories to an extent. Yeah,
no, absolutely. So like you said, the last two episodes have been the review of under 20 World Cup and then the preview of the under 21 championships. Who was the standout player then for you in the under 20 World Cup? Who was the one that you think you'd pick out as a scouted protege, if you like?
I think it has to be Cesare Casadei, who's at Chelsea, the
Yeah.
Italian midfielder. He got the golden ball and the golden boot. He got 7 goals at the tournament. Really good at just attacking the box, crashing in there at the end of moves. And I think by all accounts, he did reasonably well at Reading because he was on loan there during the second half of last season after he signed from, I think it was Inter. He signed for Chelsea and then Chelsea loaned him out. I think, yeah, it has to be Casadei, but there were a lot of Uruguayans. Uruguay won the Under-20 World Cup, just for context. A lot of Uruguayan players there who were very robust, but also very talented. And then a couple of Italians as well. Tommaso Baldanzi. He was your classic, very diminutive, creative attacking player who was just able to link things, really good with his movement, good in small spaces. And a couple of the Koreans as well. There was a centre half for South Korea called Kim Ji-soo, who I see that Fabrizio Romano has been tweeting about in the wake of the Under-20 World Cup. So I think a move for him. I think he's at Songnam in the second division in Korea at the moment. A move for him is probably on the cards. But I mean, the reason that we cover those tournaments is because it's just so enriching to see. Well, first and foremost, because the vast majority of outlets don't have the resources or the inclination to cover them. So we really like to get in there and make it our own. But just I really enjoy seeing players at X tournament or Y tournament and then seeing them pop up somewhere in a major European league further down the line. I mean, 4 years ago now, wouldn't quite say fell in love, but absolutely adored the performance of Yanis Hadji at the Under-21 Euros for Romania. And then when he ended up signing for Rangers, I thought, you know what, that's absolutely class. So just lots and lots of different stories about players that have followed. Loads and loads of those.
Yeah, it's quite gratifying that. I think I was the same when he signed. Obviously, he didn't do very well in Italy and had to go back home. So you're kind of thinking about that. But yeah, watching that championship in the summer where he was great, along with I've forgotten his name now. Who was the other Romanian that went to Reading?
George Puskas.
Puskas, of course. How could you forget? Watching the both of them, I think Rangers were linked at one point to him as well. I don't know how lazy that was, just in terms of had you been there as well. But yeah, I think it's like Football Manager come to life, isn't it? That when you I remember when I was young and you're playing Football Manager and then your club actually signs them. It's quite a surreal experience. But yeah, that brings us on nicely then. So sorry, just before we finish on Scouted then, is there anyone that you would like to point out? I guess you mentioned there you kind of get a bit of gratification if you maybe find someone that then becomes mainstream. Is there anyone that you guys maybe pushed hard at the start that people weren't aware of that you think is a big success now?
I think the ones that stick out are probably the easiest to say because of how far they've gone on to be successful. And that's Erling Haaland. There was it's a guy at Scouted, close friend of mine called Lou. He was watching some of Red Bull Salzburg's pre-season friendlies the year before he exploded, and I remember him saying to me, like, he's an absolute truck. He is just careering through defenders. So I went through, looked at the clips from those pre-season games, and I was like, yeah, he's actually going to score a lot of goals this year, and the rest is history essentially. And there's another lad, Jake. He was watching, I think it was the Under-19 Euros, quite a ways back, when Kylian Mbappe was in that France team, and some of the things he was doing in that tournament were just outrageous, and he was really high on him from very early on. Then obviously went and did silly things with Monaco, and again, the rest is history. So those are the two that probably stand out. But I mean, if anyone has the older handbooks from sort of 2019, then just flick through that and see the clubs that the players that are featured in there were playing for at the time, or the status that they had at the time, and then compare it to now. And I'm sure there'll be a few in there who are sort of network of writers have picked out and have been really right on, and a few, I must say as well, a few that we've been not so hot on, because there've been, I mean, speaking of Romanian players, I think it was Florinel Coman who I said was gonna make it big, and he's not at all. So there are just as many misses as hits.
Do you know, I actually think I was the same as you. I think we were speaking off air. We've both got a kind of mutual friend, Josh, who helped me with scouting podcasts a couple of years ago, and I'm fairly sure I put Coman on my list of players Rangers should look at signing, and he's not done much at all, has he, in the last couple of
No.
years? I actually thought about that a couple of weeks ago and hadn't heard his name, and he's sort of fallen off a little bit, which is a shame. But I guess you can't win them all. Okay, so sticking on the under 23-ish theme. Obviously that's your bag and scouted, but obviously this is also a Rangers podcast. So it would be good to get your thoughts on some of the under 23 Rangers players that we have. Obviously in the past we've maybe had a couple more high profile. Calvin Bassey moving from Leicester to Rangers and then on to Ajax, and then Nathan Patterson moving to Everton. But of the current crop just now, we've got Nicolas Raskin, who is the only Rangers representative at the under-21 European Championships. I know you watched their game last night as we record with Holland, so it'll be good to get your thoughts on him. Got Malik Tillman, who has left but had a fantastic season with us, so it'll be interesting to see if that, what you mentioned there, sort of pre-Tillman, how he compares to what I know now about him. We'll have a discussion about him, and then I believe we're going to have a bit of a chat about Dujon Sterling, because you do work down in England. I know you're unfortunately going to be covering the Championship this year with Leeds. I'm sure you may know a little bit about Sterling as well. So let's start with Raskin then. He is the one that I'm most excited about. Obviously, we have Todd Cantwell and we have Nico Raskin just now, and they're the two sort of poster boys of the new Michael Beale era. They were both signed in January for quite a reasonable transfer fee, and that's something I want to talk to you about as well, is identifying sort of lower value players, not necessarily just in Argentina or Colombia or anything, but on your doorstep as well. But let's talk about Nico Raskin. First of all, he joined Rangers in the January transfer window. He is 22 now. He was 21 then. Rangers haven't had a great 6 months. They haven't had a great season, but we didn't win anything this year, which isn't acceptable at Rangers. But I think most fans are absolutely enthused with the prospect of Nico Raskin in the central midfield. It's something I think we've been crying out for a while. So I know you watched him last night. What were your thoughts on him there, and what's your thoughts on him been since you were aware of him?
Yeah, I mean, I was first made aware of him a little while back when he was still in Belgium, just because he stood out in the data, which is usually the first port of call. You know, somebody stands out there, then you go and you narrow that pool and you go and watch them in obviously clips of them and whatnot in person if you're lucky enough. But I've always liked his profile. I quite like players of his type. You know, I quite like to call them sort of little shufflers. Where he's good at moving through the thirds. You know, can pass and move through the thirds, which I think is quite important. Not one-dimensional, very versatile. And I quite like the fact that, you know, for Belgium, he can play on the left side of their attack or the left-sided midfielder in a 4-3-3 or in a midfield diamond. But for Rangers, you know, he can play at the base of midfield in that sort of 4-3-1-2. So having that versatility and being just as effective in both roles at such a young age. I think he's still just 21 or maybe 22.
Just turned 22, yeah.
I think that it bodes well, certainly. And again, for the fee that you mentioned, was it just over $1 million or around that sort of figure?
Yeah, it was 1.5. I think he's been on the radar for a while. We tried to get him last summer. I think he was and is intended to be the replacement in the team for Glenn Kamara. I think Glenn Kamara was close to leaving last summer to Nice, maybe, or certainly a Rennes or something like that in France, and the deal fell through. And I think at that point, that money was just being taken and going to buy Raskin. However, when that fell through, that also fell through, and then it was a bit of an anxious wait to January to try and get him. So yes, his contract was up in the summer, and I think it was negotiated to run about £1.5 million, which I think is an absolute steal.
Yeah, I mean, I think it works well for Rangers in the sense that it's not a huge amount of money, but at the same time, it probably is as well to clubs in Belgium. So probably both parties satisfied with that one. But yeah, I mean, for Belgium's 21s, it's a very organised team. They're very good on the counter, which I don't know how well Raskin, is his style lends itself to counter-attacking play. I think he's probably better suited at, I don't know, less quick transitions.
Yeah.
But I think, if FM players, like myself, like you, and like I imagine lots of your listeners, I think I really do like him as sort of that Carrilero type midfielder. Someone who's going to be dynamic. He's going to get from box to box. He's going to be able to contribute with creative passes, but also he's going to have underpinning his game those defensive fundamentals, which make him a suitable fit for a team who are going to dominate possession, but means that he can sit at the base of midfield, like he does for Rangers. So, yeah, I'm a fan of his. I'm pleased that he's sort of landed well at a club where he's got a good coach, someone who's going to be very attentive to what role is going to work for him. And yeah, we'll just have to see where it goes. I don't know how well Belgium will get on at the 21 Euros. I mean, they did really well in qualifying. I think they conceded 3 goals and were unbeaten. Drew 0-0 with the Dutch last night. A really, really stacked Dutch team, it must be said. But yeah, we'll just have to see how it goes with them and him individually.
Yeah, it's interesting. Obviously, I guess for Rangers, we obviously want our players to be there and be in those tournaments, as I'm sure everyone else does. But he is one of the first names on the team sheet right now, and it's a very crucial season coming up. Our pre-season starts in 8 days, I think it is. I'm sure it's the 30th of June. So it's a very real possibility he'll still be at the tournament, which isn't ideal. He was frozen out for a good few months at Standard because he wasn't signing the new contract. So he's maybe not got as many minutes in his legs as he would have. So I guess a shorter break might be okay. But he will still need a bit of a break. So there's a little bit of catch-22 there. We want to be this club that is progressive and buying in all these players. But unfortunately, as we've seen for every single player, international football doesn't ever seem to stop nowadays. So there is a bit of a catch-22 there. It's interesting because I think exactly the same as you. I think for me, if I was pinning him down to a slot in Rangers midfield, if it's as a diamond, as you say, it would be kind of left 8 or a right 8, wherever we're comfortable, depending on who else comes in. However, it's conceivable that from January until September, Rangers will buy a completely new midfield and attack. So it is a little bit difficult to see where it's going to go and what's going to happen. I think he's absolutely comfortable as a 6, like you said. Maybe if we move to a 3 at the back, he might end up becoming more of a natural 8, and we don't necessarily play with a deeper 6. We'll have to wait and see there. But the midfield could change quite drastically. On that note, another of our hopeful signings, prospective signings, is Jose Cifuentes. Now, I've covered him quite extensively a few nights ago on Heart and Hand with Simon Edwards. If you've not heard that, please go and have a listen to it. But just from your point of view, Joe, because you mentioned off air again, that's someone you've tracked for a while. I can really see that working with a kind of Raskin, Cifuentes, maybe even Cantwell as the 10. I feel like that's a really nice mix of skills. What's your thoughts on him? And do you think that's maybe a complementary skill set for Raskin?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say I've watched Cifuentes since the 2019 Under-20 World Cup, but at that stage for Ecuador, that Ecuador team was really fun. They've gone on to essentially all become, or the vast majority of them become full internationals, and that's usually a good sign. I mean, the pathway from South American football to MLS is well travelled, and I think he's done reasonably well in doing so. But he's a type of player who I think does complement Raskin, because he's that bit bigger, he's that bit bulkier, he is just as combative, but I think he does maybe offer a little bit more in terms of output in the final third, purely because of his size. And I think coming to a league like Scotland's, that would definitely stand him in good stead. I think there are no qualms that I'd have about him physicality wise. In terms of how he'd fit into a midfield, I can't say that I watch enough of Rangers to say that I know the ins and outs of how Michael Beale plans to play next season, given signings that are likely to be made. But if you're looking in that sort of market, then I think there is plenty of upside to a signing like Cifuentes. Just think the only thing that you might have to get used to or reconcile with is the international call-ups for Ecuador, because they don't always align with the European calendar, to say the least.
No, they don't align with MLS either, because I noticed that, I noticed that he played on Tuesday night for Ecuador in Philadelphia, and then he came on as a sub last night, Wednesday night, for LAFC, which I've never seen that turnaround before. I don't think in terms of a player that Rangers have been involved with playing the next day, international and then club side. So yeah, we'll see how that one goes. Like I said, it's been rumbling on for a while, but not set in stone. But again, Joe, that's one where Rangers have identified a player who has 6 months left on his deal, and they're going out to get him. What's your thoughts on that strategy overall? It's maybe different in the Premier League, where teams can afford to maybe go in big with a year to go and spend, I don't know, 10, 15 million pounds on these players. But for the mid-range clubs, how common is that you've seen? I'm thinking maybe clubs in Belgium or mid-table Holland or mid-table Portugal, that they're now looking specifically at that 6-month market rather than 12-month market, or waiting for the free transfer.
Yeah, I think a lot of them choose not to go for waiting for the free transfer because there will be other bigger clubs that are ready to hoover them up. I mean,
Yep.
if you've ever done any scouting in Germany, in the sort of the lower leagues or in that general area of Europe, you'll find that there's a lot of teams in the Bundesliga who have free transfers lined up for several months in advance. I think FC Köln have done it this year with a couple of players from the Zwei Bundesliga. So that's probably a reason why they're unable to wait that extra 6 months, because in that time period, bigger teams who are able to offer more lucrative packages are able to hoover them up. In terms of the 6 months thing, it's probably the best that mid-range clubs can hope for in terms of getting a player in, essentially using that first 6 months as a free hit, and then you're also not paying over the odds. You're paying something which is a little bit lower than market value.
Yeah, no, I think that's spot on, because if we think about Raskin, then, for example, not only did Rangers get him for 1.5 million, but they got him bedded in to a new culture, a new club. He's comfortable with the league. He's played everyone twice, I think, given how crazy things are up here. But then also, if he goes to the under-21 championships and has a really, really solid tournament, then he's going to be on a lot of clubs' list. Now, we obviously want to get a couple of years out of Raskin, but in the modern world, if you've got a player locked down on, I think it's a 4.5-year contract he was on, and he then lights up one of these international tournaments, there's going to be clubs sort of knocking your door down, isn't there, in terms of maybe not this summer, but certainly he's going to be on a list for maybe next year or the year after. So it's really useful, I think, to get that business done early.
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with you. It is the sign of a club which does things proactively rather than reactively, which I think is probably the better way of looking at things from a scouting perspective.
And we're not always great at that, Rangers, to be honest. Over the last I was going to say over the last couple of years, but over the last 30 years that I've been following Rangers, I think proactive has never really been the main thing. So yeah, it's good that we got one. Second last one I want to talk about, Malik Tillman. Was it Rangers? He's been in the news this week because Bayern rejected the clause that we had in the contract. It meant we could buy him for 5.8 million. Bit of a quirk here, Joe. We could have bought him for 5.8 million. Bayern had a buyback in there of 9 million, which is quite low, but I think that's not unreasonable. But instead they've cancelled it. They paid us £1 million, and we get 10% of the future fee. Not something I'd heard too much about before. I know there's a precedent with Toby Alderweireld, Atletico, Southampton, Spurs type deal. Quite an interesting one. Is that something new? Have you came across that before? That sort of, we never really owned the player, but we get money for having him on loan, and then we get a percentage of his future transfer fee. Is that something that you've heard about?
It's not something I've explicitly heard of before myself, but you can see how it benefits the bigger clubs, can't you? And I wouldn't be surprised to see that becoming a little bit more commonplace because of how many young up and coming players that these big teams have, but they just don't have the space in the senior squad to blood them. So yeah, I can see. I don't know. Yeah, those more affluent teams, shall we say, being able to pick out the squads that, or rather the clubs that they're going to trust with a loan, and then essentially use a little. Oh, here's £1 million, here's 2 million, 2.5 million, little kicker, to say, actually, you know what, you had him, he did exactly as we wanted. We're going to have him back, and we're going to try and flog him for more. And then even if he doesn't do well, then it's the option's there. We still get money for him. So yeah, it's not one I've come across, but you can definitely see the merits of it if you're a big club like Bayern.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to have Tillman staying. The only issue I probably had is the amount of work that we have to do in this window. £6 million on someone who would be playing in similar places to Todd Cantwell or Tom Lawrence when he comes back from injury. It would be great to have him. He's only 2021. He had a fantastic season, certainly 6 months of it before he got injured. He's got experience in the Champions League as well with us. He set up the goal which put us into the Champions League against PSV. He had a very, very good campaign. I think he finished off with 14 or 15 goals for us, if I'm not mistaken, and 5 or 6 assists. So for someone who came to us at 20, just 20, I think when he came, his first year of senior football, I think he did very well. And like you said, we got the player. Okay, we didn't win anything, but we got the experience of the player, and we got a bit of money back, and then Bayern can take the player back, developed, and move on. It's just the way that things work, I guess, when you're a super club. I know Tillman was on your list a few years back as someone to highlight. He's obviously, his brother plays for LAFC along with Jose Cifuentes, which is an interesting quirk of fate. But what were your thoughts on Tillman then, I guess, at Bayern? I assume was where you first came to hear of him.
Yeah, I mean, I quite like incongruous players, and I sort of suppose by that I sort of mean those that he's a big-bodied attacker, but moves quite nimbly and is actually quite good in small spaces, but at the same time also does sort of the more conventional stuff that you expect larger attackers to be able to do. The pin defenders, roll them, the quick bursts over short distances, both with and without the ball, like you maybe see from the more leggy central midfielders who are good at covering distance. I think, in particular, I to be honest, I missed when he joined Rangers, and then it was only when he started to pop off that I thought, actually, you know what? That's a really, really good move, because I think those types of players are what Scotland has always like struggled to produce. So when they come from mainland Europe, the real athletic types, the ball carriers over distance, they really stand out as a good blend of physicality, awareness, technical skills. So it wasn't that much of a surprise that he did well. I think the output though was definitely a surprise, because it being his first real senior season was yeah. I mean, it's a shame that he's obviously not going to be at Ibrox next year, but certainly one for the record books. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think you're spot on there, because when he joined, it's obviously coming from Bayern Munich. We haven't had huge amounts of success with the young up and coming loan market. I think the only one that we could class as success was Ryan Kent a few years back. But we have a youngster in our academy, Alex Lowry, who has had a bit of game time, and he's only, I think, about 6 months younger than Tillman. So at the time, there were fans saying we should be giving Lowry this place, blah blah blah. That's how this should work. And I think that sort of quietly dissipated when you've seen Tillman physically. He's the exact opposite of Lowry. Lowry is kind of longer hair, very slight, socks at the ankles, typical kind of flair player in Scotland, if you like. Whereas Tillman, 6'2", very muscly, very strapping. I think you're right in terms of development. He's way ahead of any of the players that we have in our academy, certainly in the attacking positions. So that is something that I think is useful. And we hear people talking about we shouldn't be a breeding ground for bigger clubs, etc. I guess if it works, it works. And if we've now got a relationship with Bayern where they might want to send someone else this summer or the next year that's even more highly rated to come and get a year of football that might be better for them than Bundesliga 2 or Bundesliga 3 or whatever, then I guess it's a mutually beneficial thing. So there's more than one way to skin a cat. Okay, last player I want to talk about then is someone who is a little bit closer to home, I think, as far as you're concerned, is Dujon Sterling. I was aware of Dujon a couple of years back. It was various articles I read where there was a bit of chat about, is it going to be Reece James? Is it going to be Dujon Sterling that comes through Chelsea Academy as the right back? I think it was at that time. I think Reece was always a bit higher rated, but I don't think it was ridiculously far apart. He's bounced about a little bit at Stoke and a couple of other clubs, etc. on loan. From what I gather, he did pretty well at Stoke last year, playing as mostly a right back, but also filling in At left back, it's one of these under the radar signings. We make a laugh and joke on here because Michael Beale was a coach at Chelsea and Liverpool, and anytime he speaks about a player, he's either coached them at a youth level or he's played against them, and he mentions it in every game. Apparently, he had Dujon Sterling in the same group as Mason Mount when he was a 10-year-old, and he's now linking that back. I don't know if you're going to tell that someone's going to be a great signing for Rangers in 2023 when they were 10. That's some pretty forensic analysis, but that link always seems to pop up in press conferences. So Dujon signed on a free transfer. Slightly complicated, I guess, because we've got club captain, Hall of Famer James Tavernier as right back right now, and we also have Borna Barisic at left back and also Ridvan Yilmaz at left back. So I think the general feeling is that Sterling is coming in as a rotation option, which is very much needed, and certainly in the case of James Tavernier. But what's your thoughts on him as a player, I guess, from what you've seen or what you've heard, or maybe even from scouted?
I think with Dujon Sterling, that a lot of the early career chatter about him, about being compared to Reece James, is because they're quite similar in build. And it's very easy to say, well, there's two right backs at Chelsea who are both of a similar age, similar build, and they both play in the same position. I wouldn't say that they were, I don't know, traveling sort of like two parallel lines. I think there was always an idea that Reece James was on a higher trajectory, but Sterling is by rights a decent enough player himself. I mean, I don't know whether he's a Premier League caliber player, but he's certainly got something. To rub shoulders with the likes of Reece James, Mason Mount, Fikayo Tomori, Callum Hudson-Odoi, and those Chelsea youth teams, which were so successful. I think it's 3 Youth Cups and 2 UEFA Youth Leagues that he won with them over the course of a couple of seasons there. So as far as football and educations and a grounding comes, then you're not really going to get too many better than that. I think the big thing with him is that it might have been 3 years ago now, but he suffered an illness which still remains undisclosed. And I'm not going to speculate on what it may or may not have been, but I think his agent said it was something which restricted his movement, which obviously if you're an athlete, if you're a professional footballer, is going to be obviously very damaging in the immediate aftermath, but also the sort of the long-term recovery that will go on. It's not just like especially with it being an illness, it's something which will definitely require rehabilitation. So for him to have come back as strongly as he has is obviously a credit to himself, how he takes care of himself, his professionalism. So I think they're the traits that you want when you're signing a new player, is that you want to see that they actually they understand the gravity of and the importance of their role. So best of luck to him. Really hope he does well. Again, don't know how much he'll play, but certainly a good option. And the fact that he has that existing relationship with Beale it can only be a positive, really, can't it?
Yeah, I think when you go through a big sort of rebuilding window as Rangers are doing, people do tend to the free transfers sort of fly under the radar. We've got Kieran Dowell in, we've got Dujon Sterling, and people are obviously gravitate towards the bigger names, maybe in Jack Butland coming in or the bigger money. But more often than not, I think one or two of the free transfers does tend to fly under the radar and become a very solid player. So fingers crossed we get that this year. Okay, just before we finish then, Joe, we had Simon Edwards on the other night, as I said, and he was talking about the value with Brexit and various other changes of South Americans coming to Scotland and the UK, and how that's changed with the point system, and they are higher value. You cover a lot more of the globe and Scouted, a lot more of the globe. Are there any other areas that maybe Scottish clubs are sort of missing a trick on it? We have had, with Celtic's success over the last couple of years, we have had an influx of Japanese players at Celtic, and then I think we've had one or two at Hearts and Motherwell as well. So it does tend to move in cycles there. If one thing works in a country, it seems like everybody grabs on to that, and we start trying to get that through. Are there any sort of areas there that you think there's maybe undervalued clubs or academies or even players that could be coming to Scotland Rangers as a bit of a stepping stone to maybe a top 5 league?
I think the first port of call I'd be looking at is somewhere relatively on the doorstep in Scandinavia, because under the Brexit regulations, or the governing body endorsements, the essentially just a fancy version for a work permit. A lot of Scandinavian players don't get work permits to play in the UK, but with sort of the Home Office making an exemption, that I certainly know it's the case in England. I don't know what the ins and outs are in Scotland, but I know it's Premier League teams and Championship teams can make between 2 and 4 sign-ins from of players who ordinarily wouldn't meet the 15-point threshold.
Yep.
To get a work permit. If that is the case in Scotland, I think Scandinavia is somewhere that clubs will begin to target, because there are so many leagues there, and there are so many players from loads and loads of different places. Scandinavia has a long-standing. I mean, I'm saying it in very, very broad brushstrokes here, but Scandinavia has typically been a first step into European football for a lot of African players. You look at the top scorers in Norway and Sweden at the moment. You've got Akor Adams at Lillestrøm in Norway, and you've got Benny Traore at BK Häcken in the Allsvenskan in Sweden. They're both on double figures for the season already. Obviously, their seasons start sort of in like April time because of the calendar. And they both came from, I think it was Benny Traore came from ASEC Mimosas in Ivory Coast. We're obviously a big club there, but bigger European teams are more reluctant to take a look at them or take a gamble on them, I should say. And then Akor Adams, I think, came from a smaller club in Nigeria or a smaller academy. So if Scottish clubs can look at Scandinavia and think, right, well, you know what, this is a potential avenue for us, then there is. I mean, don't get me wrong, there'll be misses in there as well. I know that Elias Melkersen did really well in Scandinavia,
and
then came to Hibs and maybe just didn't gel. Doesn't mean that he's not a player. He is a talented player, but maybe just wasn't at that level yet. You may be looking at players who are a few years older than Melkersen, maybe looking at 24, 25, who haven't played outside of Scandinavia, being a bit more robust, bit more ready for the step into Scottish football. So I think that's an area. I know South America. I mean, you look at what clubs like Watford and Brighton have done with scouting in South America. Obviously, if you can find suitable feeder clubs or a feeder club where you bring them in, they might not necessarily get a work permit to begin with. You loan them out to someone you have an affiliation with, get those points, and then be able to integrate them. Watford have done that with lots of players. Brighton have done that with players with their relationship with Royal Union Saint-Gilloise in Belgium. And you look at the success they've had with South America. Enciso, Bonanotte, McAllister, players that not many people had heard of before they came, and now a lot are household names or are going to be household names. So if clubs like Rangers can exploit that, because the point system means that if you play in Copa Libertadores, which is the Champions League in South America, or the Sudamericana, which is like the Europa League, if you're able to get some players who've got some potential there, then you probably wouldn't be paying as much for them as you would if you were going from Italy or France or Belgium or Germany, etc. So they're sort of the two areas that I would be looking at if I was in a fantasy head of recruitment role somewhere.
Yes, it's interesting because we always have the sort of budgetary issues. I think we're becoming maybe more of an attractive prospect in terms of the good success we've had in the European stage, or certainly going quite deep into the leagues, etc. But we are still sort of hamstrung by, for spending £3 million, they probably need to be one of our best players just in terms of the finances that we have up here. So I think we need to have a balance. That's why I think the undervalued model of Raskins and Cantwells, etc. is great, married with hopefully the successful free transfer model. But then I think the next step for us is definitely looking at this. I know we've spent a decent chunk of money on Ridvan Yilmaz and Rabbi Matondo with sort of different success rates there. But if we can sort of start to then look further afield and maybe get in players that are of a higher quality than that for around about that same fee, I think that's a really interesting next step if we can make it. Okay, Joe, thank you very much for coming on. Where can the listeners hear or read more from you?
Probably the best place to find me is at Scouted Football, which is at Scouted FTBL, for more sort of stuff like this, and also on the Scouted Football podcast, which is available on all major pod platforms. If there's anyone who's got a strange affiliation with Rangers and Leeds, then they can find me on Twitter at Joe Donahue, and at the Yorkshire Evening Post, which is the local paper here in Leeds. But yeah, no, thank you very much, Adam, for inviting me on. I always love sort of doing this sort of stuff, just, I don't know, chatting about players at certain clubs and who'd be a good fit where. So no, it's been good. Cheers for having me.
No worries. Very, very enjoyable to have you on. As we said, if you'd like to subscribe to Scouted, we'll put the website and the Kickstarter in the notes of the thread. Please go and do that. It is one of the best publications out there, so I would really recommend it. Thank you all for listening.
That was a Heart and Hand production.